Today's forum is the first in a new leadership series entitled What's on Your Mind? The series offers a wide variety of community leaders a chance to voice their concerns and explore their ideas, literally talking with them about anything that might be of importance. I'm very pleased to introduce our presenting sponsors for the series, Columbus CEO and Cassidy Turley, which is represented by Tom McGarity and Kelly Gottschall. Thank you, sponsors. Okay, now on to today's forum. A biography of each of the speakers is in your forum flyer, so I'll provide only a brief introduction. Our first speaker has been with the Columbus Foundation since 2003. She serves as Executive Vice President for Community Research and Grants Management for the Foundation. Please welcome Lisa Courtice. Our next speaker is the Executive Director of the Human Services Chamber for Franklin County, which serves as one voice for Central Ohio Social Services agencies. Please welcome Yvonne Hunnicutt. Our next speaker is well known as a leader in a number of roles in Central Ohio. She began her current position as president of KeyBank's Central Ohio District in January 2011. Please welcome Melissa Ingwersen. You probably recognize our moderator today. She's relatively new to Columbus, but having just moved here last year from Chicago. This is also her first time on the CMC stage. She co-anchors the evening news at WBNS TV. Please welcome Kristen Hartman. On behalf of the Metropolitan Club, Columbus CEO, and Cassidy Turley, please welcome all our panelists. And Kristen, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me? All right, lovely. Okay, so we exchanged some emails prior to our conversation up here on stage, and as you know, the topic is what's on your mind. And so these very generous women suggested some of the things that are on their mind, and one really kind of jumped off the page at me. I don't know if it's because of where I am in my life right now, but it was something that I actually hadn't heard of. And so I thought, I want to learn more about that. And I'm going to start with the topic that you provided, lean in. What is lean in, and why is that what's on your mind?
Well, lean in, as many of the women in the room know, right? Yeah. It's a book by, and someone has the book too. Hold it up.
Wow.
Oh, a couple people
there
have
we
the
go.
book. Hey. By Sheryl Sandberg, who is the CEO of Facebook and has had a very successful career in technology, and a brilliant woman. As you read this book, graduated top of her class at Harvard, but just a down-to-earth woman as well. And she's, you know, there are lots of takeaways we could glean from the book, but a couple are: women, sit at the table and lean in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what have you gotten out of it?
For me, it's been an affirmation.
Yeah.
She's grappling with working and having a spouse and having a family, and so just how crazy that all is.
And how many people
all
here
the time
are grappling with all of that? That's why I found it so interesting. And it took me back to a situation that I had seen on a plane. Actually, I was traveling from Phoenix to Chicago to see my folks, and there was a woman sitting in front of me, and she was crying. And there was an older woman sitting next to her, and she asked her, well, what's wrong? And the lady was leaving her baby for the first time. She was working. It was a business trip. She was upset about it. And the older woman said to her, you know, she kind of patted her on the shoulder, and she said, well, if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that you can have it all, just not necessarily at the same time. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And why?
You know, I just believe there are phases in a day, there are phases in a week, and there are phases in your life. And so you just try to figure out how to balance those things at points in time, and you're never going to be perfectly in balance. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, depending upon where you are in your career, maybe you're pushing hard on your career because your family's in a good place, or maybe you don't have a family at that point in time, or a family at home, or you know, that kind of a thing. Other times, maybe you are hands-on parenting, dog parenting. We were talking about puppies earlier, you know, that sort of a thing. And you are all in at home and have to sort of step back from maybe those 60-hour weeks to something a little more normal. So I think there's real truth in that.
Okay. How have you done it, Yvonne?
So, you know, one of the things that I shared with the ladies is my approach to parenthood and my career has been a tad bit different. So my entry into parenthood started when I was a little younger. I was a freshman in college having my son. And so I recognized very early on intuitively that if I was going to be intentional about raising him, particularly as a young black man in a society, that there was going to be some sacrifices that had to be made. And part of that was advancing my career at that particular time. And so I took a step back because I acknowledged that I wasn't going to be able to have it all right at that particular time. And it's the best decision I have ever made, because now looking at him as a 20-year-old sophomore at Kentucky State University, he is my beaming pride. So just know that this whole balance, but there are some other areas too that I still struggle with, looking at personal life with professional life. So it's absolutely about kind of sitting at the table, leaning in a little bit more and being more intentional about your voice at the table.
Okay.
I know this isn't about lean in, but I would just offer maybe a counter view on some of it. I've skim read it in the interest of full disclosure, so I'm not all the way through. But you know, I think the notion, it takes the premise of women leaning in, which I completely agree with. But I also think companies need to lean in. I don't think this is a unidimensional conversation. And so I think that there are still places that we as companies, men and women in corporations, big and small, serving as mentors, as looking at non-traditional work patterns. I mean, there's a whole set of things. And so I guess my one small quibble as I was skim reading was the notion that it came from a women's perspective of women leaning in. And I think women are what percentage of the population? Some majority, and certainly the majority of college degree earners right now. And so I think collectively as a population we need to lean in and get all voices around the table.
Yeah, so that these personal, there we go. So that we can more effectively strike that professional and personal life balance.
Right.
Okay. One of the topics that also came up that I know we all care about because it's our future, education. You know, I'm a year into Columbus, and I've had an opportunity to really, you know, sit back and evaluate. But I want to know, what do you think the state of our public schools are here, and how do you think we can make them better?
Go ahead, Melissa.
At one point, Lisa and I were friends, I thought.
That's not a softball at all, is it?
No. So, you know, first of all, I am completely unqualified to opine on that because while I do have children I have twins who are sophomores in high school, they're in the Bexley schools, so not in the Columbus City schools. So I have a public school environment, but you know, a suburban school environment. I'm not trained as an educator. I've never spent a moment other than as a volunteer in in a classroom. So I think it would be arrogant of me to think that I could offer some opinions.
Well, what do you see in your world that works?
What I can say, absolutely, is number one, that broad brush, high school students who are coming into the workforce are largely unprepared for that. So we hire tellers or summer work, and that notion of critical thought, of reading, sometimes of core work skills, show up on time, professional language, all those kinds of things seem to be somewhat lacking. I will say that I've also had the privilege of, you know, reading the newspaper and being in some briefings and hearing about some of the ideas that are coming out of the Education Commission, and I'm delighted to see some of the thinking. One of the things I will observe just again in my own family is my children come home to iPads and iPhones, but they're not really, they're being taught by people. I mean, yes, they have smart boards and such, but largely in the same ways that I was taught. You know, a teacher standing in front of a room, giving a lecture, reading homework, doing worksheets, all that sort of stuff. And so if that doesn't tell us that something needs to change, because in my workforce we're using all of that technology, they're using it at home, and yet I send them off every day to a situation that doesn't fully incorporate all the range that technology can bring, but all the other kinds of things that can be offered there. So I think there is constant room for improvement.
Of course. When you say that perhaps they're not prepared for analytical thought or critical thought, do you think it's because there's always this pressure to teach to test? Or do you think, what do you ladies think the issue might be?
Well, I will, frankly, I am very much tied to early care and education. I think there is a lot of lost opportunities to not invest early on in the foundation of our young people. What we know, statistics continue to show us that when young people have that, during their formative years, when we're helping them with their language skills and things like that, not only do we eliminate opportunities for them to enter the juvenile justice system, but they go on to become contributing members of our society. They graduate from high school at a higher rate, and also we can mitigate some of the trauma loss. I mean, there is a plethora of research in our state where we're leading some efforts around brain trauma in our young people. And we are missing opportunities to really take some of that and apply it to how we are actually investing in early care and education for our young people. Not to dismiss the opportunities where we are providing more resources and support for workforce development and technology. But at the same time, if we're having young people that are entering, kindergarten, I'm sorry.
It starts there.
Absolutely,
Even
absolutely.
pre-K.
If they cannot grasp their critical thinking skills at that particular age, we do ourselves a disservice to try to help them gain those skills later on in life.
How do you engage parents to really be there for their kids? Because that's half the battle. I mean, in some respects, how do you get them? How do you get them to take a stake in their child's education if they're not already?
There's a relationship between children who aren't doing well in school and the income level of their families.
Right.
And so I'm going to generalize here, but I think there's some things we could take away from it. Too many parents had really bad experiences in school. And so school isn't a place they want to go and embrace necessarily and feel confident in. I know in my own parent-teacher conferences with my own family, I've had my own questions about, do I understand this test results, or right? And I'm fortunate to be really well educated. So when I was executive director of the Childhood League Center, we used to work every day to make every parent feel like you can come in here and ask us questions that you think are really stupid. So I think that's one of the barriers.
Okay.
I also like to add, in my former life as a parent involvement coordinator with CEOGC Head Start, which is one of the largest grantee Head Start organizations in Cuyahoga County, one of the areas that I would impose on our family service workers is to actually meet parents where they are. And this goes back to Lisa's point. Rather it be a parent who is well educated with a pretty influential economic background, or a parent who is low income by federal poverty levels, meet them where they are. We should not assume that everyone is on the same level. And sometimes that's very basic definition of meeting them where they are. If you need to do an assessment or some sort of a scorecard with a parent, go to McDonald's where it's more convenient for that person to get there. And oftentimes we have a one-dimensional perspective around what is parent involvement. We think if parents attend PTA meetings, that's parent involvement. If they don't come, then they're no longer engaged or they're no longer involved.
But they might be engaged at
home.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. That young person that's coming to school every day, that's clean, that's happy, that's ready and prepared, that's parent involvement. And I think we should broaden our definition of how we are engaging parents and cut them a little bit more slack in all areas of where they come from in their backgrounds.
Okay. One of the things that's also on my mind, just because of my own experiences, being new to Columbus, I've had a lot of people ask me, how is Columbus different from Chicago or from Charlotte, where I also worked? And so I'm going to turn the tables, because at the table there I learned that you're from Cleveland and you came here 2 years ago. And since so many people have asked me that question, I'm going to ask you that question, Yvonne. How is Columbus, how does it stand out? What are the points of differences from the Clevelands or the Chicagos? I can tell you what I have in the back of my head, but I'm going to let you go first.
Absolutely, absolutely. Columbus is a wonderful town. I have enjoyed being in a more family-centric environment. While I am an empty nester, but it's great to see so many opportunities for families to continue to engage and grow here. It's a much more collegial town. I find that stakeholders in the community are very supportive of one another. So if we're talking about the corporate community versus the nonprofit sector, there is this unified need to move the entire city forward. Cleveland is a little bit more stealth. I'm looking in the back at some of my colleagues in the back who we often joke a little bit about me being from Cleveland and having a slightly more aggressive approach to some things. Is that right, you guys? Like, is that right? Okay. But I do so much appreciate the chances here to move forward. It's a little bit more progressive. What I also shared is the diversity in this town. While Cleveland is diverse, rich in terms of ethnicities and nationalities, oftentimes many in our places of work or worship or even our social events is very much segregated. And so it doesn't give you the same chances to be able to connect with other folks who don't necessarily look like you or may not have your same perspective. But here I have been welcomed by so many different folks and so many different aspects, and it is much more of a approach to move the entire city forward.
Yeah, I agree with you on all those counts. And the one thing that I have observed is that there is a recognition that this is a city doing this, and there's an energy here that I really did not experience in other places I've lived. And people have acknowledged the energy and they're harnessing it, which I absolutely love. I love the Midwestern sensibility here. So my question for the two of you who have been here a little longer than 2 years, how do you harness that energy and grow, but also maintain that wonderful, warm Midwestern feel at the same time?
I don't feel that it's threatened.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't see that threat. I see people working together to grow the city and grow communities, but not losing that reality and the charm and
That's
the
good.
dedication.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd be inclined to agree with you. I think that the key for our city is that of any city, which is, as we think about leadership transition, bringing and continuing to nurture people and bring that diversity of thought to the table and bringing others along so that we can continue this trajectory that we're on, which is truly exciting and something that I'm glad to be a part of.
Okay, and you had mentioned that the state of the economy was something that is on your mind. So.
I'm a banker.
So where do you see us right now?
Us being Central Ohio, we're very well positioned. I mean, we have knowledge workers. We have a wonderful base. We've always had a wonderful base out of service as opposed to some of the heavy manufacturing. So our highs and lows have tended to be more muted. Certainly this last economic downturn, Columbus saw it more than I think it had in many prior. But even then, I mean, we're starting to come out of it. Our unemployment rate is significantly lower than both the states, but also the national unemployment rate of 7.6. I think we're in the 6-ish range, maybe less than that at this point. And so, that's meaningful. It's meaningful because it's jobs and it's people being able to support themselves and contribute to this economy and contribute in other ways. So I think there are, in the business community though, without question, there are still questions.
Okay.
So I think, I spend a lot of time out with companies big and small, and every day people are saying, I'm not sure if I'm going to make that investment yet or not. My company's doing extremely well, but I don't know if I'm going to build that warehouse quite yet, or I don't know if I'm going to buy that third line yet.
Why do you think that is? Because 2008 did hit so hard?
I think there are a number of things. I think there's a hesitancy because it's not ancient history.
Yeah.
And those cuts that a lot of people made, whether they were in the not-for-profit arena or the for-profit arena, still feel very, very close to home. And the last thing you want to do as a business owner is have to go through that again. I also think that, our government, there have been a lot of questions about what would be around the corner, the next calendar page, whether it was, tax change, sequestration, Affordable Care Act, and on and on and on. And so in an uncertain environment, if businesses absolutely don't have to, they won't necessarily make those major investments.
I would add that while some things are getting better, there are many nonprofit leaders in this room who can talk firsthand about the poverty and the use of food pantries and shelters has never been higher, and they're not seeing it diminish.
Yeah.
So is this a new normal, and what will the future be for our community?
If it is a new normal, how do we address that as a community? How do we do that? You know,
And I think there's some pretty good efforts, you know, led by the YW and the Community Shelter Board and the pantry and food bank systems to have that community-wide conversation, dialogue. It's an ongoing dialogue, but smart people at the table.
I think one of the things that's happened, certainly even, I mean, I'm a lifelong Columbus resident. I've served on boards. I mean, you know, so I think I know stuff.
You do.
Useful and non-useful, but stuff. But the conversation that I think the Columbus Foundation and the United Way have had over the last year, really highlighting poverty in some maybe different dimensions, has been eye-opening and constructive, because if you're not talking about it, I think it does sort of burble under the water, and I think we do need, as a community, to acknowledge it, talk about it, and marshal our resources, because that's when we're at our best here in Central Ohio.
Well, Lisa, it's interesting that you brought this up, because it's something that Yvonne had on her mind.
Absolutely.
I mean, you new numbers regarding poverty and how it impacts growth.
Yes, in 2012, the Ohio Association of Community Action Agencies and the Community Research Partners released a recent report that shows our poverty numbers nationally and then how it impacts Central Ohio. And so I absolutely agree. The approach would still have to be this collegial trajectory that we're on in Central Ohio. I mean, we saw some great victories on a local level with working with the Funding and Review Advisory Committee, where the 3 largest sectors in the city come together to talk a little bit about how can we generate more dollars, because we are acknowledging that we have growth in areas of poverty. I mean, 83% of our young people are in poverty. 1 in 3 young people live in homes that of an unemployed parent. So we are acknowledging that in 1 in 3. And so we are acknowledging it and trying to address it. And I think part of the leadership from the Columbus Foundation to bring outside resources to the community so that we can have a more frank discussion about what are ways that we can work more cohesively to be able to address those issues.
Okay. State budget. How does that work into all of this?
Yvonne loves the state budget.
Yeah, state budget. So.
Hey, you brought it up.
I did bring it up. Actually, I brought my notes too, so I don't veer off too much. I think from a Health and Human Services perspective, absolutely, we're keeping a keen eye on the debate with Medicaid expansion. The Human Service Chamber of Franklin County publicly supports the expansion. We know that 275,000 Ohioans will have greater access to health care, to mental health and addictive services, to specialized treatment. And we most certainly want to support that, because it means our lowest income Ohioans. And if we are not serving our most vulnerable, then what are we necessarily doing in advocacy? Some of the other issues that we're paying attention to is continued funding for services like child welfare and adoptive services. We want to continue to see Help Me Grow be funded at bare minimum 2013 levels. I mean, like to see it increase, but at bare minimum 2013 levels. When we're talking about investing in early care and education, we know that Help Me Grow provides that level of assistance for new parents to be able to be all that they can be to their young people. And then we're looking at other areas supporting community corrections. The governor it was a very smart policy to sign the collateral sanctions. I know that Alvis House, under Denise Robertson's leadership, has been taking a lot of, has been able to help a lot of restored citizens return successfully back to our community so that they can be contributing members to our society. I mean, Impact Community Action Agency also is working very closely with those citizens that oftentimes we forget. We forget that, you know, they simply made a mistake and they deserve a second opportunity to be able to come back and get fair housing, fair jobs, and those type of things. So we're looking very closely at some of these issues. It's a little daunting to know what's going to happen on the local level, the limitations to local governments to be able to generate more revenue, because we know that means that there's going to be an additional burden to those human service agencies who are already on shoestring budgets. I mean, we're already providing increased services for increased needs on very limited resources right now. So this is my call to action to you all. If you could do a little advocacy out there, I would appreciate it. Just stay tuned and continue to support, as I mentioned before, our very vulnerable populations in our society.
So, you know, the conversation has kind of gone to this point where we're talking about living in an era where we're, you know, less people are doing more, it seems. That said, I can't help but keep going back to, you know, this city that I see and all of the positive things that are happening here. What are the most exciting things about Columbus for you three? And I'll start with you, Yvonne.
Oh my goodness. I have really, you know, very candidly, I've been very blessed to enter a community that holistically welcomes you. I work with some very great people. There's some great happy hour spots here.
I agree.
I live in a wonderful, I live in Reynoldsburg. It is a absolutely great community. I can't single out one thing. I really enjoy being in a situation where I am considered a community leader, get an opportunity to work on a grassroots level with many of our community-based type of organizations, but at the same time, I have many colleagues that I value on a corporate level, and those that are not necessarily in my sector. So it's not just the one thing, it's just the hospitality of this community.
Melissa.
I grew up here, and so I have such an affection for this community. You know, I'm delighted to see it as a growing community as opposed to a receding community, you know, because, as I said, I have children, and I would love at some point in their lives for them to have the opportunity to come back here, because there are great jobs and it's a great city that they choose to return to. So I love that element about it. I love that I think we're a fairly open community. So I've seen any number of people move in here and sort of raise their hand and say, I want to get involved. Exactly, lean in. And say, I want to get involved. And I see our community do so in ways that I at least anecdotally hear perhaps other communities or cities not be quite as open to that if you're an outsider. So I like that. And who can't love a day like today in the spring? So.
You're absolutely right. You mentioned jobs. How do you keep attracting corporations, businesses?
I think you nurture your own first.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's lovely to go off on trade missions and, you know, seek that shiny new thing across the sea or across the country. But I think the great power in the statistics suggest that more jobs come out of your existing businesses than even out of those that you bring in. So nurturing and supporting your own is a huge element of economic development.
And we have something called The Ohio State University,
Right?
which is
Absolutely.
a huge, great job
you know,
base.
you have all these
or-
great thinkers around this community. You have logistics. You have all kinds of things that really help provide some of that support and infrastructure that you know, can help you build or grow your business.
Sure. Lisa.
Well, we are very philanthropic, and we have the 7th largest community foundation in the world that is right here in our community. So,
Yeah.
and my many colleagues that are here with me. My husband and I chose to live here, and it's a great place to raise a family. It's highly collaborative. You know, as a professional, it's a highly collaborative place to be. So it just feels right. We're here to stay.
That's wonderful. And, you know, the things that you all mentioned, that's what I have seen in my first year here. And absolutely, it makes Columbus so attractive, I think. You know, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I just, the spirit here is unlike any of the other places I've lived. And you talk about the collaborative spirit. There really is a sense that people are working together. And I have so thoroughly enjoyed that so far and hope to continue to enjoy it. So with that, unless you have other things that are on your mind, we are going to open this up to questions. There is a microphone right over there. So, and just about any question within reason, of course. And so without further ado, whoever might have some curiosity for any one of us, step up and ask away. And there is somebody making her way to the microphone. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Carol McGuire. I'm on the Columbus Metropolitan Club Board, and I'd like to thank, first off, CEO Magazine for this terrific partnership. I can see tremendous potential coming down the road for more and more of these great topics. I'd like to circle back a little bit to the first introduction of being at the table and kind of raise the issue of a bit of an inadequate number of women at the serving on corporate boards in this community. We have tremendous intellectual potential here to increase that and Chastity Kudros and others have a Women at the Table organization that's been initiated, but how would any of you suggest this begin to be leveraged up a bit more so that we can share, as women in this community, more of a voice at the corporate table?
I would suggest that for those of you who haven't read the book, to read it, because that is certainly a trend throughout the book, that now more women graduate from college than men, yet there are few women on boards and few women leaders. And it's just a struggle. And strategies for board leadership, I think, honestly, I think it's knowing the right people who can open those doors for you and provide access for you. I do think it's about people championing other people.
And I think what you all mentioned earlier, the fact that there has to be a corporate climate that embraces this notion that, you know, you have a personal life and you have a professional life, and you've got to make that all work together. I think that's hugely important. And interestingly enough, when we were chatting a little bit before, and you had suggested this lean in as the topic, I went to the site, and they have bloggers, and Tom Brokaw, who wrote The Greatest Generation, he is predicting that this century will be the century of the woman. So how do you make that happen? You know, that's the question. He thinks it will be there. Why? Why do you think it's going to be the century of the woman?
Well, let me go back just to build on something Lisa said, too. So you have to be prepared to be on a board. Just because you're female, you have to prepare yourself for that and have the requisite skill sets. In fact, public boards require, you know, an accounting expert and different things. And so I think it's both being championed. I think it is also becoming known, both through volunteer and not-for-profit work, so that people see sort of you in that setting, and then also preparing yourself almost from an intellectual perspective in terms of that. And then knowing what you're signing up for. It's real work.
Oh, yeah.
So it's real work, real preparation, and real liability potentially in terms of, you know, the responsibilities that you have. And I just think that we need to have a round conversation even around that, so that it's not just a numeric goal we're hitting. It's terribly important because whether it is women or, again, people of all forms of diversity, bring a better view, and corporations, a broader view, and then corporations, there are all those statistics. I think Sheryl Sandberg cites some of them in terms of the ROEs or share prices of those companies that have a more female board tend to have higher returns. I mean, pretty interesting stuff, but I think there's a lot to it.
May I also add, I think it's also reaching back into the pipeline. Like, we've been talking about this in terms of training emerging leaders. And we've had some great initiatives over the country in terms of taking your daughter to work day or take your son to work day and things like that, but we stop there. It's not a singular movement. It should be something where we're providing that level of accessibility and openness to our young women regularly. So I remember during my married days, I had learned early on from our pastor's wife that you don't become married and then learn to become married. You learn to become married in your singleness. So you don't wake up the next day and you have a new last name and you know all of the tricks and trades of being married. You have to learn those things along the way, and you pay attention to what that kind of grooming is. And so it's the same thing with sometimes our young women and being at the table, leaning in. Sometimes you don't know what the etiquette is. Sometimes you don't know what's to be expected, and we should look at even our middle school young women and begin to talk to them about that and give them more opportunities to be at the table, so that you're not brand new to this. This is not foreign to you, that you deserve to have that seat.
So it all goes back to that mentoring.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Is there another question in the audience?
Hi, Julie Graber, the Institute on Women.
Hi, Julie.
I'll leave the whole leadership conversation. I think that Melissa's point about companies needing to lean into is absolutely critical in terms of our local upping the numbers of women in leadership roles in the community. And it really is an economic development issue. Are we going to use the full talent pool that we have available? But my question is actually what's on my mind, which is violence against women. I followed the rape in Steubenville, the story behind that, fairly closely. And I am intrigued by some of the conversation that's taking place now about the fact that this is not a women's issue. This is an issue that we have to engage men in, because that is the only way that we are going to put an end to it. And so I guess I would ask you, you know, what perhaps could be some initial steps this community could take in order to have that conversation?
Well, I absolutely agree. It has to be a co-ed conversation. In the chamber, we've been having this discussion around domestic violence, and we've even implemented a subcommittee to look at these issues and how do you engage men in those conversations as well. We can't necessarily assume that they're traditionally the perpetrators. There are also some back and forth. And then we also have to engage the diversity of the community too, so including the LGBTQ community, our young people in all different areas. Some of our organizations like the Jewish Family Services and Amethyst and some of these other great institutions are addressing these kind of issues and how do you bring everyone to the table. I most certainly think too it's about having a unified conversation with some of our young men. As a mother of a 20-year-old, I hope that there's nothing my son can get from another woman in terms of how you treat a woman that he couldn't get from me first. I hope that I was his initial model and I showed him how you have a healthy relationship, but that's where it begins. And we need to tear down some of these barriers and these myths in our community about what it means for men and women to engage with one another. But outside of that, some of the organizations are doing a great job to help advocate for smart policies, number one, some more initiatives that will help us look at this issue as a whole.
Can I say something too? I think one thing that is really, really important where the Steubenville case is concerned is continued coverage, because continued coverage of that case continues a dialogue that clearly is very important. What happened there suggests that a dialogue hadn't taken place. I mean, and the fact that it is getting news coverage, widespread news coverage, I hope, you know, when we put that story on the air at night, I sincerely hope it might prompt a parent to sit down and talk with a child and say, you know, that isn't the right way to treat another human being, man, woman, child, you name it. It's not the way to treat another human being. That's what we hope when we put stories like that on the air. It's not to put it out there for the sensationalism, at least from my perspective. It's so that people will learn from it. And if there's anything positive that comes out of that, I hope it's that discussion. And I had spoken with the attorney for that young woman, and that is her family's sincerest hope, that people start talking about this.
What we really need at this point is that conversation. We need to make sure all young people understand consent. There's just a conversation with boys that I don't think we have, so I'll leave it.
But you know, in the meantime, I'm not going to wait for boys and men to change, because it's going to be a long process, right? So as a mother of a 15-year-old who's in the room with us today, what I want her to have is the greatest, highest level of self-esteem, so she's prepared in as many circumstances as possible. And so we need to continue to empower girls to have that self-confidence.
But we've been doing that.
Well, we got to keep doing it.
Yeah, but we also have to bring the boys into the conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Jane Scott. Melissa, you made a comment a little while ago that I'd like to just pick up on, and you talked in general about children, whether they graduated from high school and maybe even graduating from college, that aren't necessarily ready emotionally, even just human relations skills, let alone decision-making skills. I know we've had quite a bit of conversation about education, but let's follow that track a little bit more. We're going to be having a couple of forums coming up on education and actually initiating a whole series. Just a little bit more thought about maybe where did we get off track with kids, and how do we pull that whole level of respect back? Because I think what you're talking about with Steubenville is based on respect for other human beings and courtesy and kindness, and I mean it's woven into everything we've talked about today. It's woven into the violence, it's woven into the lack of respect, it's woven into kids not being ready to enter the workplace. Where'd we get off of track, and what's it going to take maybe for us to try to pull this back?
Honestly, I wish I knew the answer. I mean, that's a complex, multifaceted question, and we can't expect just the classroom to fix it or just the parents to fix it. I mean, it is a community issue, whether you're talking about the violence or the preparation. I mean, not standing for things or standing for things, you know, is critical. And so, you know, I guess I don't have a clear answer for you because I think there's so many pieces and parts to it. It comes from the family, it comes from the church or faith-based community, it comes from those that surround them, the opportunities you give kids, all kinds of things.
And instead of working as individual entities,
Right.
it's acknowledging that this is a collaboration. You know, no one does anything alone. And I think that's really important to acknowledge.
And I would add, this might not be a popular viewpoint, but if we took away alcohol and drugs from some of these situations, would we get to the point where we're getting?
I think as we go back to it and we continue to talk about the collaborative approach, I miss the community. It takes a village to raise a child, the African proverb. I mean, we really did live in that kind of environment. And everything has been removed from that because we are segregating ourselves from our input with our young people. So now we feel like teachers, their responsibility is just to teach, state a curriculum. You don't offer any sort of guidance, any sort of leadership with these young people. Many of us was mentored by a teacher, by an administrator. Many of us received hugs at school from these people who also cared about us. I recall living in a community where if I did something at the playground and Miss Murdoch, my grandmother's friend, saw me doing it, I was going to get in trouble there. And then she told my grandmother. So by the time I got there, I got in trouble again. And then when I got home, because my grandmother had to tell my parents. I mean, that was just the community who really cared about the entire child. There was no, this is my child. These are our children. And
Right.
so we no longer reserve the right to correct or redirect anyone's child because the parents are more disturbed that you had the audacity to offer that kind of guidance to their children versus looking at it and appreciating that I'm glad you spoke up and said something.
Yeah.
I would just echo one piece of that, maybe from my perspective. You know, I look at the Columbus Public Schools, and there have been some wonderful examples of partnerships from the business community in the Columbus Public Schools, but they'll probably have been the exception rather than the norm. And I think, as I think through my business career, we've thought about the schools did the schools thing, the business did the business thing, you know, human services did that thing. I mean, we let ourselves get a little bit
Compartmentalized.
compartmentalized,
Yeah.
and especially as it related to the schools. There were not-for-profit organizations that brought things to the school after school, right? And so again, I think it's that coming back with our arms all the way around all of this. The economic guru.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette. I'm owner of Regionomics and a CMC board member, and thanks for being here. My question is kind of a follow-on on the point that you've all made, how easy it is to raise your hand in this community and make a difference. I completely agree with that. But I'd like to turn it a little bit on its head. How do we get younger people especially to raise their hand and make a difference and move away from the attitude of what's in it for me and move towards what's in it for my community? How do we do that?
That's a good question because all of the events that I've been to over the last year and the different organizations, I've seen a lot of young people giving. So I haven't really thought about that along those lines. Have you, ladies?
I too. I mean, I'm a creature of who I know, what I know, where I go. You know,
Right.
that sort of a thing. And so I'm not their demographic, much as it pains me to believe anymore. You know, but then every so often my path does cross, and I am stunned. I do see some real acts of great leadership and things, you know, green shoots coming out of
Youth outreach.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Young minds, or you know, the YWCA's Young Women to Watch at their Women of Achievement event just
Sure.
kind of blew my hair back in terms of some of the women the three women that
three
were profiled
upcoming.
there. Yeah, you know, so I do think it's there. Now, what's our responsibility? To nurture, to not say we've done it that way before, or I tried that, or oh, there's an organization over there to do it. But I mean, I think we really do have to open our heads and our hearts, and I'm speaking as much to myself as I am to anybody else when I say that.
I absolutely agree with Melissa. I mean, I've worked in, I do volunteer and I work with young people on a regular basis through my sorority work and the Future Possibilities kid coaching program. And I think it's really allowing the young people to have a voice. I mean, they're at the table, they're there, they want to be involved, but we diminish their opportunities because we do precisely what Melissa said. We don't want to listen. We know everything. This is how I've done it. And we sometimes don't want to enter their world. We're so nervous about areas of technology and sometimes having fun and looking a little silly and being weird like them and dressing the way. I mean, sometimes you have to get on their levels. I mean, parents in the room, I mean, think about when your kid was 3 and you had to get on the floor and crawl around and do some old weird out, just made you look silly type of thing. That was the best time you ever had, and your young people respect you for it because you're relating to them. And I think we've taken all of our relation out of being able to work with our young people.
Yeah. Okay. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Letitia Chastain, and great segue because I'm a young professional and I am pursuing my master's, and I am a married woman. We'll be married for 12 years next week. I have 2 children that are getting ready to embark in junior high school, and as a young professional, I would like you all to talk a little bit more about the balance, because what I find is that sometimes you can be imbalanced, you can be working really, really hard, and then there's things that lack. And I have school, I have kids, I have a husband, all these things going on. So I would like to get a little bit more conversation around that work-life balance, because for myself, as a young professional, that could be a hard thing to juggle. So I would like to get a little bit more feedback on that.
Well, I'll leave it to Lisa and Melissa because I'm an empty nester, so all I have is work and my glass of wine, so I don't know. I can balance both. That's my balance. You write with one hand and you drink with the other, so that's my balance.
That might
So
be the
we're
secret.
all listening and learning.
I have a supportive boss and colleagues and husband, and I take it a day at a time. And it's a team effort. And I try not to, I just do what I'm doing in the minute.
Yeah,
because if I start to take it all on,
it becomes intimidating.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I
you have to
disassociate
go.
from the whole experience of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
And you? That's a healthy mental health. We got wine and we've got disassociation. I'm going to look good. I will say the same thing I say every time I'm asked this question, which is, my balance isn't your balance. So I can't presume to offer that. So what I've been willing to give on might not be things that you're willing to give on. I will never run a marathon. I can tell you that with absolute certainty. I'll never even walk a marathon.
You'd surprise yourself.
But I mean, so what's given in my life is some of that stuff that for some people is a critical stress reliever. So you just have to figure out where the places you are willing to give, and then kind of give on those points. And having a sense of humor about it all is pretty helpful too.
And I think the thing that works for me is there are no rules, I mean, your rules are your rules. They're no one else's. And you work within your own parameters and you figure out what you can make work on your own. And like you, I take one step at a time. I don't look at the whole month's calendar. I look at tomorrow's. Tomorrow's day, that's it. Or the day that I'm in. So that's how we work it. Come on up.
Hi, Randy Walters from Jones Day in Ballymet. Just a quick question for Lisa Courtice. Lisa, even before you came to Columbus or after, give us some background and describe what you see as the best decision of your life.
That would be marrying Tom Courtice 4 years ago. Hi, Randy! We chatted over lunch.
For giving us all an opportunity for all of us to lean forward. There's the rumor around the world that we're one of the most intelligent communities, and I think we are. So
most intelligent, yes.
I think today's program kind of demonstrates that. There's a lot of intelligence around, and we want to keep bringing it all to you. So If you enjoyed today's forum, you can see it again, share it with others on YouTube. There's a link at the CMC website. Welcome to continue today's conversation out in the lobby with coffee and cookies. Recycle your name badges, put a card in it if you want some more information about CMC. Make your reservations for next week. It's going to be a good program. The education equation in search of better results, which goes along with today's topic with Superintendent Richard Ross. Once more, let's thank today's sponsors, Columbus CEO, Cassidy Turley, and our speakers, Lisa Courtice, Yvonne Hunnicutt, Melissa Ingwersen. And thank you, Kristen. I'm glad you're in town. Thank you all.